Alright, hello, welcome back. I'm here to do another series setting breakdown. My name's Paul Westman, and welcome. This week I'm going to be discussing a series that is not necessarily one of my favorites, but it is pretty good nonetheless. And this week it is the Aegis of Merlin series by James E. Wisher. Alright, so let's get into it. Alright, this genre of book, if you couldn't tell by the cover, is an urban fantasy book. It is an urban fantasy series. Although one of the key tropes throughout the series is one of the chosen one tropes, so don't necessarily know if you would like that, but the series length is currently 11 books long. Now this is divided up into two distinct arcs. First we have book 1 through 7, and that was kind of a completed series in and of itself, but then James is introducing sort of new factors into it, and books 8 and beyond are a separate arc in and of themselves. There is one short story that is included there about sort of a side story, but it is not really necessary to read to understand the rest of the books. Series is currently unfinished, and book 12 does release on October 25th, 2024. Alright, now the setting of this series is a definitely modern time. And as for the location, it is set in sort of almost an alternate history America, but the way it does derive a lot from our actual history, although there is a degree of suspension of disbelief dealing with a lot of the society and culture. But as for like any actual locations in America, it's not at all used. Instead, it borrows more from like the DC or the DC Comics universe of naming of cities. For instance, there's Sentinel City, there's Central City, and another key location throughout the first arc of the books is a place called the North American Alliance's Arcane Academy. It is not quite just a magic school series, but it does borrow from that genre a bit, especially in the earlier books, although it does move on past that, particularly in the second arc. Now for the supernatural races, first we have the wizards. Now a key feature of all the wizards that are in this world, and particularly this series, is wizards are always women. It is a trait that only women can have. So next we have spirits. I'll discuss a little bit more about spirits when we talk about the magic. Then we have elves. Elves aren't actually a race that we interact with directly. However, they are a very key feature in like the historical context of the series, and oftentimes they're referred to in like almost like they were the Atlantis of sorts, in that they did have a very key impact, and they were considered an extremely powerful magical group, but they've all died off, so all that's left is like ruins and artifacts. There is reference to dragons in the series. And although there's only one we meet, and it's not really a typical dragon per se, but rather sort of like a humanoid dragon hybrid. Then we do deal a lot with vampires, and there's also your general day-to-day non-sentient monsters that are about. All right, now to talk about the magic. It is a hard magic system. There's specific rules, specific spells that you have to learn. A lot of these spells are based in part off of like incantations and casting of the spells like that. Although it does become a little bit softer in the later areas, although that could be more just, it's not specified because it's more common. So, but as for the system itself, magic is divided up into 6 basic elements, and all magic is considered elemental. So, of the 6 elements, first we have air, fire, earth, and water, your basic Euclidean elements. Then the expansions on that is just light and darkness. Now, basically all magic falls or is underneath the umbrella of these 6 elements. For instance, healing is considered under light magic, and then there's like dispelling magics or anti-magic, and that is considered under the darkness element. We don't really get into too much of the specifics of any variants of what might fall under the base elemental magic, because our main characters are primarily have affinities in these 2. Now, wizards, they only have an affinity to a single element. For instance, if they have an affinity to earth, they cannot also have an affinity to water or light. Now, while they have that affinity, that just means that that is what they can perform most easily. That is what they will be best at. It does not necessarily lock them out of using magic from any of the other elements. Now, there are exceptions. For instance, one of the characters who is a strong user of light magic actually has almost like an allergy or an anathema to dark magic. So she can't use dark magic at all, but that is an exception, not the rule. As for who becomes wizards, all people in the world are actually tested for whether or not they're capable of using magic at the end of high school and before they move on to college. And an important thing, and this is part of where I say the suspension of disbelief has to be brought in, because it really makes no sense, is that everyone's tested, even though only women are wizards. So it doesn't really make too much sense, because there is a lot of patriarchal mindset within the society as a whole, and yet women are considered the more powerful because only women can be wizards. So the way I see it is like the world was taken from our world and then just added a few things onto it to sort of force it into this new uh, society of sorts, but it doesn't account for a longer history. So, like I said, if you're not as anal retentive about that sort of things, then and you can just overlook it, the books are relatively fine in that matter. But it is one of the few gripes I have with the series. Alright, now we'll get into more of the political entities. This is one area where I think that the book does a better job of describing it, because the main characters do end up dealing with government and politics a bit more than otherwise than what you normally see in the books. But the main political entities, and like I said, this is entirely based upon our world, but a lot of things are renamed, so it can take a few seconds to actually think, and sometimes you gotta double check what they're talking about. So first you have the North American Alliance, which is obviously just like the US, Canada. Then you have the Kingdom of the Isles. That would be the United Kingdom. Next you have the Empire of the Rising Sun, which is Japan / East Asia. We're not given specifics of exactly how large each of these are, so this is mostly just approximations based upon what I've read in the series. Then you have the Empire of the Dragon Tsar. That is Russia. The Land of the Night Princes is a lot less specified exactly. It is Eastern Europe, most likely from the old Soviet bloc. But since this is the Land of the Night Princes is specifically mentioned as a land ruled by the vampires, so that's almost like Transylvania and that area right there. So then you have the Blessed Kingdom, which is location-wise in Western Europe. I'm not sure exactly how that or where exactly it fits, but it is considered like right across the bay from the United Kingdom in France. Although I'm thinking it's almost like the Roman Empire of sorts. Yeah, so it's much harder to gauge exactly how far it goes. So then we had mentioned the Republic of Australia, which is rather obvious. Now these are not the only lands, but these are the ones that are most often talked about or specified. So next we have some non-governmental political entities. We have a group known as the LaFay Society. They are sort of a social group / sort of like Southern Belles, the debutantes, and also almost like celebrity mixed in with that. And they do have two wings though. First is that political social wing of like pushing for women's rights and women equality almost, even though, like I said, it's women are considered more powerful, and it's given no reason why there's still any sort of patriarchy in this world. But then there's also an extremist wing of the LaFay Society, and they're the ones that believe that, like, not only are women better, but men also deserve to be like no better than servants or slaves. So they're a much more extremist, almost terrorist-like group. Next we have Kincaid Industries. Kincaid Industries is a company, and one thing that they are most known for is they're like the premier Magitech supplier, at least in the North American Alliance. They're extremely wealthy, extremely powerful because of that, and yeah, they're one of they're at the forefront of research into combining magic and technology, and uh, essentially they have a very outsized influence over the government because they're extremely wealthy and their magic is very powerful. So, uh, lastly, we have the Ministry of Magic. I have this under here because while each government does have their own Ministry of Magic, each one is sort of dealt with uh, as their own unit, but they are an entity unto themselves. So, yeah, it's easier to consider them as sort of an agency of the government and not necessarily the government itself. So, all right, moving on, we have a little bit of the history. This is a bit harder to talk about because we don't get too many specifics referred to. There's talk of an elf war. Now the elves, like I said, were ancient, extremely magically powerful group that, and there was a massive war against them a very, very long time ago. It's referenced in the histories like we might reference the Trojan War. So, said that in that time, like back then, the elves were kind of being oppressive or something, and there was an uprising, and almost all elves were killed, and to the point where they are practically extinct in this book. And in at least the first arc of the series, there are no real living elves that are mentioned. So, next we have the war against the Society of Magic. That is said to have happened almost immediately after the Elf War, but this was when a woman named Morgana Le Fay, she sort of rose up in the aftermath of the Elf War, and she's tried to essentially take power for herself, and was eventually defeated. It is said that nearly 500,000 people died during the war against the Society of Magic, and it is also said that that number of 500,000 dead is basically is nothing compared to the amount of people that died in the Elf War. Now, it is pertinent to note that the Society of Magic actually grew over time to become the Le Fay Society, named after the leader of the society, Morgana Le Fay. So that is where that group sort of originated, and why it is sometimes frowned upon by those outside of it, even though it is also somewhat considered prestigious and charitable on the more social aspect of it. Yeah. All right. Now, there's a couple specific landmarks that are referenced in the series. First one being floating islands. There are 6 total floating islands that are circling the Earth. we're not given a reason. We're not given like how. It's just like some sort of magic. Uh, but the islands themselves, they cannot be explored because they are all surrounded by magical shields. Prevents anybody from going up. So nobody actually knows what they're doing up there, why they're there, what's going on with them, how they've been floating throughout the whole time. But they have been circling the Earth fairly close. It's not like they're way out by the moon or anything. They are within the Earth's atmosphere. Um, and they're not small islands either. They are large enough to cause a total eclipse underneath them. So, although one thing that I don't necessarily like is the eclipse by one of the islands is considered a plot point in the series in a couple of the books, but it the way it makes it sound like is that the eclipse just appears almost out of nowhere when the island covers the sun, which is not how eclipses work. That shadow would constantly be traveling along the land. So that's another point where the suspension of disbelief is required. The next real big landmark that is talked about is called the Lonely Rock. The Lonely Rock is an island where magic doesn't actually work. So there's various theories posited throughout the books that of as to why the magic doesn't work, but the doesn't change the fact that magic simply doesn't work. It is a dead area, and that makes it a perfect location to be used as a prison for wizards. So, yeah, it's referred to later in the series as like the prison. It's brought up. Very little specifics are talked about, but it is mentioned multiple times. All right, now let's get into the book one of the series itself. Now, if you look at the cover, you can sort of get an idea of some of the things that are in this book. First off, the book is called The Impossible Wizard, and that is because of the main character. So first, it's set in Sentinel City, which is located along the Atlantic coast. It's not necessarily a metropolis, so I'm pretty sure it's not supposed to mirror New York City. So I would put it further south along more of the mid-Atlantic coast. So then there is a Shadow Carnival that is in the Sentinel City. Like I said, that is a fair that is sort of comes about to celebrate when the eclipse arrives. So, like I said, the eclipse is considered a plot point, but it's never actually accounted for the fact that the eclipse is always there. It's always specified as the eclipse appearing over the city as some sort of special event. So, even though it shows up pretty much every year. Now, the main protagonist of this series is Konryu Koda. He is a man that right after high school he goes to the testing day, and it's found that he can use magic. Not just a little bit, but he also registers higher than anyone else ever has in the history of them testing for magic. And since he's a man and only women can become wizards, that is why he is considered the impossible wizard. Now this leads to him being the only man who's ever been admitted to the Arcane Academy, which causes conflict there. Then there's conflict with the LeFay Society, who consider him a complete abomination. So he also is referenced by one scholar who claims him to be the reincarnation of Merlin, because apparently the lore of Merlin is in this series as well, even though women are the only ones who can use magic. So anyways, Kanryu, he discovers that he has magic, and book 1 primarily deals with him discovering that he has magic, and then sort of the world's initial reaction, and the initial attempts to kill him. But of course, they all fail because, in part, Kanryu is also the son of one of the one of the dojo masters who is considered like one of the strongest martial artist users out of that dojo. So, all right. Now, some of the primary characters outside of that are Maria Kane. She is Kanryu's best friend / girlfriend, and she is also a neighbor who lives in the same apartment complex. Both Kanryu's mom and Maria's dad both work as part of the Ministry of Magic, so there's close family ties to that. Also, Maria is a wizard who gets tested, and she's a legacy wizard on top of that, as her mom is the one who is sort of acts as almost like a mercenary wizard of sorts, or a wizard for hire, and she specializes in, or has an affinity to, light magic. So oftentimes what she ends up doing, or what she's hired for, is locating things or creating wards, which is another provenance of light magic. And the last main character we really deal with is Johnny Salazar. He is also a good friend of Kanryu, and he is just a normal guy. He's just a normal friend, but since both of his other friends end up going off to the Arcane Academy, what Johnny ends up doing is actually joining the military because of the benefits, and also there's various deployments that he could go to where it's not necessarily dangerous per se with the weaponry, but a very nice locale to visit, like Hawaii or Florida or something of that nature. So, like I said, book 1 gets into like the initial discovery of Kanryu's magic and the world's initial reaction, and book 2 is when we actually delve more deeply into the academy style of series and more explanations into like the magic system in and of itself. all in all, it is not a bad series. I enjoyed it, but there are some specific things that I definitely have to overlook whenever reading the series. But no series is perfect, so I will still recommend it for a good read. Alright, that'll be it. I'll be back next week.